Think of the information that someone could extract if they could monitor your smartphone. Not just your phone calls, but your GPS position at any time, all of your Facebook messages, your emails, texts, the whole lot. And then think of a whole country being monitored for all of that information coming in. Science fiction? No, reality. According to Phil Dorling, he's a senior writer with Fairfax and has a particular expertise on matters of intelligence, which means you're right in the middle of a fair storm now, Phil. First, tell us, you talk about Newgen in your latest writing on this topic in this information explosion. Who are they and why should we care?
Well, Newgen's a small Melbourne company. They haven't got a big profile. Indeed, I think until I've written the story in today's paper, no one would have heard of them. But they're one of the large number of small, middling-sized IT companies. What makes them special is that they're the distributor of a particular technology from the United States, from another company called Gigamon. And it's essentially a technology that enables people who run big IT networks and telecommunications networks to monitor the data flow within those networks. And this is part of daily life, our telephone systems, our internet, email. And this technology is really quite interesting because as the flows of data have become ever greater and truly vast, this basically involves the process by which you monitor what's flowing by copying it all, by siphoning, mirroring it and copying it off. And then the rest of the data flows off. There's no interference with the efficiency of systems. There'll never be any detection that monitoring has taken place. But it basically copies it all and then makes it available to be analysed and subject to scrutiny in a whole range of ways by national security and intelligence agencies, by law enforcement. And it's the police, the intelligence agencies, they're often looking for a needle in a haystack. How do you find the needle? They might even be looking for bits of a needle in a vast haystack. But how do you find those things? Well, the answer is you take the whole haystack. You take all the data and then you do with it as you want. And that's the essence to this Melbourne company and its connection with its American partner, is that our telecommunications providers have been obliged under law by the government to introduce monitoring technology. And the nature of this technology is all-encompassing. How do you find the bits of data that you want? You take all of the data. That's the essence of it.
So when you say all of the data, we're talking about every Australian phone call, every text message, every GPS position indicator from a smartphone sent into a giant river of data that's then sorted?
Literally. I mean, it's been the case for a very long time that all of our major telecommunications companies and internet service providers are obliged by law to build into their networks interception capabilities that can be used by government agencies, by ASIO, by the Australian Federal Police, accessed by the Australian Signals Directorate to allow them to tap people's phones, to hoover up their metadata. What's happened in more recent years is that these interception capabilities have basically taken on an all-encompassing nature, and that's necessary because of the way that modern telecommunications have developed. Your telephone calls, your internet traffic, it's all data. It's all data flowing through vast systems, and it's disaggregated. It'll arrive at its destination not necessarily in the order that it was sent. It's all mixed up. So how do you find the things that you need if you're an intelligence agent or if you're a police force? The answer is that you need to collect and harvest all of it, and the technology now permits that to happen. What you then do with that data varies, whether or not you've got a warrant to seek access to the content of someone's telephone calls. But for metadata, for who you call on your phone, when you call, where you call from, who you email, the subject line in the email, maybe not the contents of the email, but the subject line, where you are, your financial transactions, when you interact on the internet, when you visit web pages, all of this is basically collected and harvested and then is interrogated for a range of purposes.
Now, you would think that in a modern society littered with these things, that was simply just too much information to harvest in a meaningful way if you're looking for a would-be terrorist or a national security threat? Is there really the sophistication to find the threatening pieces of information in that river of information?
The average person in the street probably doesn't have an appreciation of just how complex and just how advanced the analytical capabilities are to reach into this vast pool of data and extract out usable information about individuals. We've seen just overnight in the Washington Post reports relating to the documents leaked by Edward Snowden, that the US National Security Agency is literally harvesting the positional data for billions of mobile phones around the globe and then feeding that huge reservoir of information into a whole range of analytical programs that tease out the things that they want. And that may be things about a terrorist suspect, but also maybe things about individuals that they have an intelligence interest in. A lot of it is what's described as pattern of life analysis, where they're looking for particular types of behaviours of individuals that may or may not be pointers that they're of security or intelligence interest.
If you're talking about monitoring billions of mobile phones, you're essentially talking about monitoring most, if not all, mobile phones on the planet.
Well, this is the nature and is the transformation that's taken place with the modern information age that we live, is that people live their lives interacting with the internet, with their telecommunications devices in a way that 10, 20, let alone 30 years ago, people didn't. People didn't have lives that were connected to the electronic world, but now we do. And that means that people, through their day-to-day activity, generate a vast amount of data, and that's now available to governments, and in particular to the governments of the so-called Five Eyes partners, to harvest this data and to exploit it in terms of intelligence collection.
Now, we've seen in recent times the fuss over the apparent monitoring of the Indonesian president and his inner circle by Australian intelligence. We've seen the East Timor case re-emerge, where we apparently tried to bug East Timor's cabinet. Doesn't this huge new scope of technology largely unappreciated in our community mean that we ought to be a whole lot more worried about what our intelligence agencies are and are not able to do, where they can range?
I think what it means is that in the electronic and internet age that we live, that privacy in that realm is at the discretion of governments, and particularly at the discretion of governments and countries with major intelligence capabilities. One of the interesting things that was really missed about the revelations about listening to the Indonesian president's phone was that the document that reported that was merely using it as an illustration of what could be achieved through the monitoring of mobile phone networks throughout Southeast Asia and East Asia. It cited that as but one example of what could be achieved by effectively monitoring the entire East and Southeast Asian area. And in that respect, the focus on the Indonesian president was understandable. But behind that was the vast scope of collection of data and the means by which it's being sifted to pull out those bits that are of interest. And what interests intelligence agencies now, terrorism, weapons of mass destruction, foreign policy, diplomacy, defence matters, that'll probably always be of interest to intelligence agencies, but times can change, and government's interest in what its citizens are doing can change.
Interests,
and what it really means is that whereas once people could live lives that had a reasonable degree of privacy, simply because governments lack the capability to collect the information and because their day-to-day activities didn't generate the sorts of data that they do now, we now live in an age where people's daily lives are potentially open to very intrusive scrutiny by government, and the only thing that will constrain that is the legislative and political frameworks within which governments operate.
They need to be tighter?
Well, I think it's a case that the technology has run way ahead of the legislative frameworks and indeed even the thinking of our legislators and our politicians and the general public.
That sounds like a case for an inquiry into our intelligence services and a rethink of the restrictions.
There's some reluctance to do this on the part of our government and indeed elsewhere in the world, but I think it's a case where things have moved well beyond what anyone was contemplating. As a political staffer and as a bureaucrat 15 years ago, or nearly 15 years ago, I was involved in matters around drafting of Australia's intelligence legislation that's in place now, the Intelligence Services Act. And going back then, I can think that the people who were involved in developing that legal framework really weren't talking about the sort of technology and the advances that are in place now. And I think it's always worth going back to have a look and seeing how has the world changed and are our laws and our frameworks of accountability and scrutiny, particularly for the intelligence agencies that work in secret and are not available generally to be scrutinised in public, to go back and have a look at that and say, how has the world changed? Because I think the technology has raced a long way beyond what people were thinking of a decade ago.
Now, just before I let you go, the Australian today talking about potentially 20,000 documents related to Australian intelligence work from Edward Snowden. You were talking about how SBY was actually just an example of the broader capability. How much more intelligence dirt, embarrassing revelations do you get a sense are out there that we are yet to see?
Well, we know, according to The Guardian, that they have in the vicinity of 50,000 documents. They say that they've published stories that one way or another relate to about 1% of that material. It's probably anyone's guess as to how much of that might relate specifically to Australia, but it would probably certainly be in the nature of thousands of documents, one could well imagine. And beyond that, it's not absolutely clear that what The Guardian has, and the journalist Glenn Greenwald and Laura Poitras, what they have is the totality of what Edward Snowden might have removed from the American intelligence community. So there's undoubtedly a great deal left out there. It's really the question of how much and at what pace media organisations who have access to the material are inclined to reveal in their judgments about what's in the public interest. It's perhaps the remarkable thing to date is that of those 50,000 documents, so few have so far been released. No doubt there will be more, but it's anyone's guess over what time frame and how much of that material will come into the public domain.
While since our intelligence services have been through a storm quite so threatening.
I don't think they've ever confronted this circumstance before. There's certainly been some very big leaks of an espionage nature, but this is rather different. It's being paraded in public. I think they probably might not feel this, but they could think to themselves that at the moment it could be much worse.
Phil Dorling, we'd like to stay in touch with you as this unfurls. Thank you for coming in and speaking with us today.
Thank you.